Hi everyone. This study highlights the progression of ecological succession due to hurricane disturbance in Point Pleasant Park. So, Point Pleasant Park is a beloved park home to a variety of different plants and animals. It sits on the shores of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and is routinely used daily. On September 28th to 29th, 2003, a major hurricane blew through Halifax, Nova Scotia, causing many devastating ecological deficits to the surrounding areas. This included Point Pleasant Park. This devastating deficit was known as Hurricane Waugh. The park was closed for 8 months, which further led to the opportunity to assess the effects that a disturbance can cause to a well-established area, and this was known as secondary succession. Both the physical and biological changes were studied, as well as the natural progression of forest community, and it spanned from 2004 to 2022. So secondary succession occurs after an insufficient disturbance, and it involves the regeneration of pre-existing seeds to establish new plants. This is important in the understanding of the progression Point Pleasant Park takes to reach climax community. So these are just a few definitions and acronyms that are useful to gain a full understanding of the study. Some of the most important ones that aren't listed there would be ecology is the scientific study of relationships between organisms and their environment. Forest community succession is the change in animal and plant species composition and the structure over time in a forest ecosystem. Secondary succession, which is the restart of succession, however the soil and the nutrients are still present. And then another one that is good to note is climax community, which is a stable and mature ecological community that has reached equilibrium. An acronym that you may see throughout the presentation is DBH, and this stands for the diameter at breast height, which was used to gain data. So Point Pleasant Park is a naturalized forest, meaning it is as natural as possible with modest interventions. Shown here is a list of species which are present in the forest land, and it ranges from many tree species to flower and mosses. So you can see there's ferns, shrubs, wildflowers, all of that great stuff. So Point Pleasant Park is of high importance to the Mi'kmaq Nation. It is comprised of 185 acres of forest. Point Pleasant Park was a significant Mi'kmaq gathering place known as Amtukade, and this term stands for spiritual place. Every year, the Mi'kmaq from all over Mi'kma'ki would come and gather at Point Pleasant Park. This would last for 7 days, and it was during the first full moon in the frog croaking month in the spring. Because of this significance, the Mi'kmaq protected it very fiercely. Understanding the regrowth of the park gives us an appreciation to the Mi'kmaq as they helped shape the park. The relationship between the park's community and the Mi'kmaq is still present to this day. The park has even contained exhibits which have Mi'kmaq artifacts, and this has been in the past. And this demonstrates that although our community is evolving and producing a continuous change, we still stand with the Mi'kmaq people and show them gratitude. So some objectives for our study is that we were able to determine how the overall forest community has changed over time, how the density of the dominant species in 2004 and dominant species in 2023 has changed over time, and how the chosen community metric species richness has changed. Each objective was further identified to understand how the community, dominant species, and community metric would be affected as the forest moves towards climax community. And it was hypothesized that as time does go on, forest density, species richness, and dominant species density will rise over time, whereas DBH will reduce over time as less tree cover would allow for smaller trees to colonize the forest.
Data was collected from 2004 to 2022 by Ecology 2060 students, and the study sites shown in the image to the left were chosen as they felt the highest impact of the 2003 hurricane. All tree species present in the study sites with diameter at breast height of above 2.5 centimeters were identified and classified to measure total/species-specific density and species richness, with diameter at breast height also being measured using a tape measure and recorded. Collected data was analyzed and graphed by the Ecology 2060 teaching team using Excel, with linear regression analysis performed to show the specific relationships, positive or negative, between dependent variables in time. This allowed us to explore the progression of ecological succession in the park after Hurricane Waugh in 2003, and to see the effects over time on density, DBH, and species richness. By looking at Figure 1, we can see that the total density of the Point Pleasant Park community has increased in the years after the hurricane, with the graph having a positive slope 10.057. The total density measured in 2022, 125 per 400 meters to the negative 2, was approximately 31 times larger than the total density measured in 2004, 4 per 400 meters to the negative 2. 1 year after the hurricane. We believe that this is due to a secondary succession event occurring within the forest study sites, where the disturbance of the hurricane destroyed many larger canopy trees, allowing the recruitment of smaller, shade-intolerant tree species like the red maple due to a greater availability of resources and light, which increased total forest density in the years after the environmental disturbance. Further evidence of this can be found in Figure 2, which shows the diameter at rest site of trees measured in Point Pleasant Park after the hurricane, as the graph has a negative slope, negative 0.5554. The average DBH measured in 2022, 5.59 centimeters, was approximately 3.1 times smaller than the average DBH measured in 2004, 17.425 centimeters. We believe that this points to the recruitment of new, younger, shade-intolerant trees due to secondary succession in the years after the hurricane. Both Figure 1 and Figure 2 support our hypothesis that there will be a change in density, increase, and DBH decrease over time. As the community continues to move towards its climax community, younger trees will grow into maturity, raising the average DBH, but as disturbance/secondary succession allows a shift in dominant species from the larger red spruce to the smaller red maple, the DBH will likely not reach the height of those original trees still present in 2004. Additionally, as new tree colonization stabilizes over time, so will the forest community density, and as the study sites move towards their climax community.
For both dominant species, there is a positive slope. In Figure 4, the slope of red maple is higher than that of red spruce in Figure 3, indicating a faster and more significant rate of change of density over time for the red maple species. The red spruce species has a slower and less significant rate of change. There is a positive relationship between the density of these tree species in the years gone by since the hurricane hit in 2003. The resilience of both tree species can be seen in their ability to increase in density after the hurricane hit. An R-squared value of 0.1886 for red maple and 0.1042 for red spruce indicate a weak relationship between density and time. The weak correlation between tree density and time for both tree species, red maple and red spruce, can be explained by the forest's attempt to recover after the hurricane took place. It should be taken into consideration that these trees were originally planted for military purposes, which could explain their abundance compared to the other tree species that are currently at Point Pleasant. The shift in dominant tree species over time represents the progression of secondary succession. Red spruce was the dominant tree species in 2004, and red maple was the dominant tree species in 2022. The composition of tree species shifted to favor species better adapted to the progression of succession. Red maple has advantages over red spruce, including being highly adaptable. A highly adaptable species is likely to increase in dominance over time as the forest matures. The ability of red maple to adapt to disturbances and changes in environmental conditions after the hurricane hit in 2004 allowed them to thrive and dominate the forest by 2022. Moreover, red maples are super generalist species, meaning they can tolerate a wide range of habitat conditions. Based on this data, we fail to reject our hypothesis. Both densities of originally dominant tree species, red maple and red spruce, increased over time, and the evenness between them decreased since the density of red maple surpassed that of red spruce by 2022. What characteristics make red maple a highly adaptable tree species? Red maple's ability to endure a broad range of conditions, including wet and dry areas, allow it to tolerate both drought and flooding better than other tree species. It can also tolerate full sun and part shade, as well as almost any soil type.
What characteristics of the red spruce species allows it to be considered a generalist species? They can grow in a vast geographical and altitudinal range of habitat. Additionally, they are adapted to be wind resistant, which is particularly beneficial in Point Pleasant Park and other Halifax habitats, as they often experience intense weather systems like Hurricane Juan in 2003. This ability to thrive in a wide array of environmental conditions makes the red spruce generalist in nature.
As the dominant species red spruce and red maple move toward their climax community, their growth rate will begin to plateau and there will be a reduction in growth of the other species in their community as there are less resources to be shared among new unestablished species. This occurs because the trees are more capable of growing upward to encapsulate sunlight, reducing this resource for low-growing species, allowing only species adapted to the low-light environment to survive. The community diversity becomes stable and unchanged once the climax community is reached. Originally early pioneers in the forest, the dominant species red spruce and red maple trees will move into late successional species that will remain dominant in the urban forest. This disturbance from the hurricane will initially lead to higher diversity and stabilization compared to original forest distribution in Point Pleasant Park, as it initially allows other species an opportunity to establish before being pushed out.
So species richness was the chosen metric to understand how community metrics change over time as a result of disturbance. Species richness, also known as S, which is the number of different species in a community, has had a substantial increase over the years of secondary succession on the flora on Point Pleasant Park, further allowing for a high rate of establishment. This led to the indication that regeneration of different species in the 6 study sites of the most impacted areas of the park took place. The linear regression analysis, which we can see over in Figure 5, has helped us further analyze this data. It had an R-square value of 0.6551. This meant that a high level of different species can be attributed to secondary succession. And as the forest moves closer to climax community, it is expected that the species richness may increase, but just not as substantially. The species during the first years of succession were able to be undisturbed as migration and new growth occurred, which increased the biomass. But the closer we moved to the climax community, the fewer opportunity which arose for new species to establish themselves, allowing for the dominant species to outcompete the other species. Yoakum et al. Helped further this indication as a result of their study. They talk about how the establishment of the climatic species in their case, which was red spruce, had overtaken the reforestation of the pioneer species, which would begin to level out the species richness in the climax community. This data supports the hypothesis that an increase in species richness will be seen over time, as less tree coverage would allow for new colonization in the forest.
As demonstrated in this data analysis, Hurricane Juan accelerated secondary succession in Point Pleasant by removing the canopy tree cover and allowing other low-growing species access to natural light. Based on the data collected from the dominant red spruce and red maple, we can predict that the Acadian forest in Point Pleasant is currently in early to mid-stage succession due to the amount of regrowth. Limitations with this study are that the data collected over the years are from different sites. This causes complications due to the variance and disturbance that occurred in southeast part of the forest, which received the most impact from the hurricane compared to the northwest side of the park. This study also shows that Point Pleasant Park is capable of successful secondary succession without intervention from humans. Point Pleasant has a unique history of succession as it was originally used as a logging site for the military, so the disturbances the park often faced came from human sources, which in turn aided the secondary succession of native plants, as logging removes all non-native/invasive species. Another example of how urban succession differs from naturally occurring succession is soil degradation. As soil pollution increases, the toxins hinder plant growth, decreasing plant diversity in urban communities as fewer species are capable of surviving in hostile urban environments. This study gives us important insight into the successful succession of our native species, which can be utilized in the research of other urban areas which may be struggling to regenerate after mass disturbance. Point Pleasant was used as a main battery location for the British Army established in 1749. They mainly used the red spruce and red maple trees as a source of timber for construction material and fuel. They continued their afforestation effort as a way to prevent soil erosion around their base, as these trees grow quickly and form a complex network of roots binding to the soil, holding it in place and reducing potential of it being washed out. The afforestation of these tolerant native tree species in Point Pleasant was key, as they are adapted to the soil and weather changes coming directly off the Pacific Ocean. As well, these tree species aid in the biodiversity of wildlife and organisms that inhabit the region, providing nutrients, habitat sources, water cycling, and climate control.
Learning to see in a way that incorporates both Indigenous ways of knowing and Western knowledge can influence our understanding and approach to assisting the recovery of Point Pleasant Park. The Mi'kmaq teaching Natuk Kalimk emphasizes the interdependence and interconnectedness of humans with the land. Elder Albert explains that coexistence, interrelatedness, interconnectedness, and community spirit brings to us an awareness which influences our relationship with others as well as with Mother Earth. An understanding of the interdependence between humans and nature promotes humans to take responsibility in taking care of the land. The combination of Western and Indigenous knowledge encourages us to better see our relationship with the land and how we are connected to it, which emphasizes the importance of conservation efforts and the extent of how much of an impact we have on the land around us. After a hurricane, forests can be littered with debris including fallen branches, uprooted trees, and non-biodegradable waste. Conservation efforts could include organizing local volunteers to help clean up the forest by removing debris, which not only aids in the recovery process, but also creates a strong sense of connection to the land as you witness the immediate improvement of the forest's appearance and accessibility.
These are all the references utilized to complete this presentation. Finally, we'd like to acknowledge the support from the laboratory teaching team for BIO 2060 at Dalhousie University, which included Shiori Morita and Alison Schmid. As well, we acknowledge that Dalhousie University is located on the ancestral unceded territory of the traditional Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. We also wish to acknowledge that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched Nova Scotia for over 400 years.